Tonight, the showdown between two states, Texas versus California. Which is a better place to live? California has better weather, but that's not going to solve San Bernardino's problem.
The community is slowly breaking down to nothing.
Kennedy tried to ask people in City Hall what happened.
Is anyone here? Hello?
Their job prospects are far better in Texas.
That's true. Texas is growing. But what about freedom? In Texas, politicians may grab your land.
For-profit corporation taking Texans' land.
But Texans do have the freedom to arm themselves, partly thanks to this woman. Her parents were murdered, but she isn't angry at the gunman.
The guy that did it was a lunatic. That's like being mad at a rabid dog.
By contrast,
check your action.
Buying a handgun in California is no simple task.
Neither is getting a license to open a business.
Take 1, 2, or even
Texas versus California. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
20% of you, 1 in 5 Americans, lives in either Texas or California. California is the biggest state, Texas is second. And California is the dream for many Americans. Those beautiful beaches, movie stars, great weather. Its population grew at more than double the national average until 1990. Then something changed. Last decade, 2 million more Americans moved out of California than moved in. Many moved to other states like Texas. In the last decade, Texas's population grew at double the national rate. And one of those new Texans is Chuck DeVore. He used to be a California politician. Now he's the author of The Texas Model, which argues that Texas governs better. Matt Welch of Reason Magazine also moved from California, but his magazine is still based there. So why is that? If you're getting out, California is so bad. Why is Reason Magazine, my favorite magazine, in this horrible state?
Well, that's where we've been since 1971, and it informs thinking that gets us a little bit outside of the kind of Beltway, Acela track of thinking. But it's a challenge to be there, businesses, anyone, to stay in California these days. And you're exactly right to point out, it's a new thing in California. We no longer attract immigrants.
But Chuck, there's still something thriving. There's the tech industry, the movie industry, stuff is happening. And
absolutely. California does have a lot of assets. It has Silicon Valley, it does have Hollywood, it has the biotech industry. The problem is that you can't live off of those narrow bands of industry forever. And what's happening is that because of high taxes, big regulations, unhealthy lawsuit climate, and a lot of government spending, people are leaving the state.
It started in the 90s. Gray Davis said, we got all this cash from the dot-com boom. And tell me what happened.
Well, first of all, he spent the dot-com cash on public sector pension promises and just general spending to everybody. Even in the last 5 years of so-called austerity, spending has continued to go up.
Up beyond inflation and population growth.
Yes.
New thing, global warming measures.
For high-speed rail projects that no one needs, no one wants, yet will cost $68 billion.
And even Arnold, the Republican, the Terminator, I fell in love at one point. I thought, here's a politician quoting Milton Friedman. This is a guy who gets it. He'll make it better. What happened?
Well, what happened was he helped enact the largest tax increase in U.S. history at the state level in 2009. It was so bad that I resigned as chief Republican whip in the state assembly in protest of the tax increase.
And he also supported government funds to fund stem cell research. I talked to the guy pushing this once. He was a rich businessman. I said, you billionaires could pay for this by yourselves. Why is this a government job?
It was only a government job because Democrats wanted to stick a thumb in the eye of George W. Bush, which is the same of their global warming emission standard there. It's an expensive way to say we are not Republicans, we are Californians.
On borrowed money.
And a couple of years later, I read in the papers, this organization has to be revamped. We suspect self-dealing or conflict of interest. All this money is wasted. And yet now I read, I've balanced the budget, says the governor.
Yeah, well, they just passed by ballot initiative one of the largest tax increases in history.
Tax the rich.
They've increased taxes by $50 billion. So, yes, suddenly it's going to look a lot more balanced there. But they're also lying. I mean, they're talking about revenue projections that will not come true. It's an annual tradition in California. Your budget looks balanced in January when you propose it, and then when the revenues actually start coming in, you say, oh, there's a shortfall. And that shortfall could be $8 billion. It has been as high as $30 billion in recent years. We'll see that happen again.
All right, Chuck, you've moved to Texas. You say this couldn't be a more interesting lab experiment. What do you mean?
Well, because the states are so similar, right? You have the biggest state and the second biggest state in population, the second and third biggest state in land mass. They're both demographically very diverse, more similar than different. They both are blessed with quite a few natural resources and a coastline with ports. And so with everything so similar on the surface, what you have to look at then is, why are the results so different? And of course the results are different because they're governed differently. Government at the state and local level consumes about a third more of the economy in California than it does in Texas. And that, with that extra government, you have things like 1/3 of the nation's welfare recipients are in California, even though they only have 1/8 of the population. You have more regulations, more taxes, everything.
We have a graph of the welfare recipients, the percentage of households receiving public assistance. Much higher in California than the U.S. average, and lower than average in Texas.
Absolutely.
But that just means you're starving poor people.
Well, not so. The cost of living in Texas is 42% less than the cost of living in California. And in point of fact, the U.S. Census Bureau has been criticized by Congress for 20 years for not taking into account cost of living. The fact that different states have different costs of living when it comes to housing and food and clothing.
And that's relevant when you look at the poverty rate. There was an old poverty rate measure where Texas lost to California. 16% of the people in California were in poverty, 17% in Texas. But now there's a new measure that includes the cost of living.
It does include the cost of living, and it also includes some government benefits. And with this new measure that came out just 1 week after the election, what you see is that the state with the highest poverty rate in the nation is California, higher even than the District of Columbia. And that should really be a warning or caution to progressives who maintain that this big government model is really the path to prosperity. We argue that it's entirely the opposite, that in fact Texas is a model for how America could be better run and there could be more prosperity by having less government.
There's been more job growth in Texas. Texas gained in the past 10 years more than 1 million jobs. California lost about 500,000 jobs. But Paul Krugman says in the New York Times, what's this Texas miracle? This is when Governor Perry was running for president. It's an unmiracle. The Texas unemployment rate was 8.2%. 8.2% isn't great, but California at the time was 11.8%.
California's had over 10% unemployment every month of Barack Obama's presidency until basically last November.
And it's still 3% higher than Texas.
Yes, and it's been higher in California than the national average every month since 1990.
Now, regulation. You're freer in Texas?
Oh, it's a huge difference. In fact, it was so bad in California that the Democrats allowed this law to be passed that sought to find the cost of regulations on small business. And when it came out, Governor Schwarzenegger was so embarrassed he didn't want it to come out. Finally, we pressured for it to come out. The cost on the average business in California for regulatory compliance is $133,000 per year.
The legislature passes, on average, around 900 bills a year. Laws. Here you go, Governor. 3 a day, or even 4 a day when they're in session. The Texas legislature, it's in session every 2 years, is that right?
Every 2 years for 140 days.
Right. They just don't have enough time. And the kind of laws that they're passing in California, they're saying you can't, as a parent, hire a psychiatrist to try to make your kid not gay. I mean, it's that level of crazy specificity. We're going to increase...
Michael, stay on that one for a moment, because I've covered these gay cure psychiatrists, and I think it's nonsense.
Sure.
But it should be your right to pursue something that we disagree with.
And it shouldn't be the right of the legislature to tell you what kind of things you need to do. And it's increasing the penalties, the fines, for throwing citrus onto a minor league baseball field. Seriously, that was a law passed a couple of years ago. This is the level of the way that legislatures are.
I didn't vote for it.
Yeah.
And if you're one of these big tech companies, Facebook or Google, you can navigate these regulations.
Well, you hire attorneys, you hire tax experts, you hire compliance experts that help navigate through this bureaucratic maze. A good example is if you want to build a strip mall. It takes, just to get permission to break ground and start construction, it takes 4 to 5 months on average in Texas. It takes 4 to 5 years on average in California. And that's one of the things that helps drive up the cost of housing and business complexes and factories in California.
All right, this is obvious to me looking from the outside. One works, the other doesn't work as well for its people. But the politicians are unfazed. What's that about?
Well, part of it is that you have a great home field advantage in California, which is that it's an awful nice place to live, especially along the coast. It's especially nice if you work in one of the highlight industries. And then everywhere else in the hinterlands, it's a lot of desperation, poverty, and population just leaking and running away. And so that part on the coast can generate incredible wealth, dynamism. It's fun as hell to work in those industries, right? But the rest of the state is having a much harder time.
And they don't have the political clout.
Well, there's another issue as well that comes into play in California, and that California is not a right-to-work state. They have very powerful unions, especially government unions. There's no counterpart to that in Texas. People are free to have their associations, and the unions aren't there to spend millions and millions of dollars to promote bigger government and higher taxes.
Hence, more prosperity in Texas. Thank you, Matt and Chuck. Coming up, want a free car? We'll tell you how absurd government benefits get. But next, gun control, Texas versus California. Thank you.
Of course he had a gun. This is Texas. Everybody has a gun. My florist has a gun.
That scene from the movie Miss Congeniality has truth to it. Want to buy a gun in Texas? It's easy. No Texas restrictions. Just a federal background check. In 3 days, you can get a gun. California has lots of restrictions, like waiting periods, an assault weapons ban. After the recent school shooting in Connecticut, California politicians proposed more rules. They want to make hundreds of thousands of previously legal guns illegal, and their owners would have to give them to the government. By contrast, in Texas, some politicians want to make it easier for teachers to carry guns in schools. What a terrible idea, says California State Senator Leland Yee. He joins us from San Francisco. Welcome. Also, Thank you. From Texas, Susanna Hupp, who likes the idea of teachers packing heat. So, Susanna, why?
I guess you could probably say because of my background. I know what it's like to be in a defenseless situation with a crazed shooter that's just there to execute people. Look, lawyers can protect themselves on the job. Teachers or chiropractors can protect themselves on the jobs. Why can't our teachers protect themselves on the job? They're being treated like second-class citizens.
And let's review your background about this. Years ago, you were in a Luby's restaurant when a gunman came in and killed your mom and dad. And that made you want...
Well, killed 23 people. That was the first real mass shooting in this country back in 1991.
That would make a lot of people say, I want tougher gun laws. But you say the opposite. And you've written the book, From Luby's to the Legislature, One Woman's Fight Against Gun Control.
Yes,
so
sir.
Explain your reasoning.
At that time in the state of Texas, you couldn't get a concealed carry permit. They didn't exist. So I began leaving my gun in my car very dutifully, and my parents and I were having lunch. A madman drove his truck through the window and began executing people. And I got to tell you, I can't begin to tell you what it's like to be like a fish in a barrel waiting for it to be your turn. The only thing that the gun laws did was prevent me and some others in that restaurant from being able to protect ourselves and our families.
So, Mr. Yee, I assume you strongly disagree with this. Make your
I
case.
I used to work in the school as a psychologist, and I will tell you, I don't know of any teacher or administrator that wants to carry a gun into a classroom, into a school. You know, if you start doing that with schools, then why not look at supermarkets? Why don't we look at hospitals where there's been some gun plays there?
Fine, let them all have guns.
That's not the way. That's not the way in which we want to operate in our society here in California. You know, we're about educating kids. We're not telling kids to go and pack guns and shoot them up if someone comes into your schools.
Susanna?
Wow. We're not talking about the children being able to carry weapons. We're talking about the people that can already carry weapons in the supermarkets, as he said. All we're talking about doing is allowing them to carry in a school. But what is the lesson that we adults are saying to kids? That when you are a child and you grow up, to solve your problem, carry a gun. And that is not the life lesson we ought to be teaching children.
Well, that's what the police
we have
do.
is too violent already.
The police carry guns.
Is not a guarantee.
And that's fine. Police ought to carry guns. They are there to protect the people of California.
California has all these gun restrictions, but there are more murders in California per capita than Texas. The gun laws don't work.
No, that's absolutely not true. You know, studies upon studies have demonstrated that the states that have jurisdictions that have the toughest gun laws are the ones that are the safest per capita.
That's nonsense.
That's just
That's
indisputable.
That is not true. That is absolutely wrong.
Chicago, Washington, D.C., look at California cities like Oakland.
All I'm saying is per capita. When you look at the per capita data, that it is absolutely true that jurisdictions with the toughest gun control are, in fact, the safest. I mean, the reality in California
Oakland has the
is that we have a
6th highest murder rate in the nation.
Can I interject something?
Stockton, the 11th highest murder rate. Hang on, Suzanne. I just want to contradict what seems to be going against the fact. How do you explain Stockton per capita and Oakland, the highest murder rate, among the highest murder rates in the nation?
No, what I'm saying is that if you look at the entire state, if you look at the entire jurisdiction, that's what we're talking about. You can't look at specific individual cities and so on, because that, of course, is it's
well,
going
I
to
think
give you
this
a
is the
little
data
bit
from the whole
bias.
state.
But if you look
but
across,
Susanna,
I'd like to ask Mr. Yee a question. Mr. Yee, can you name one single place in the United States where one of these mass shootings has occurred where guns were allowed? Because if guns are the problem, why haven't we seen these mass shootings at the dreaded gun show that you all are trying to make illegal, or NRA conventions? If guns are the problem, you're talking about places where there are thousands of guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens. Yet we only see these mass shootings at places where guns are not allowed.
There were armed guards there, and that did not stop those young individuals from coming into Columbine and shooting and slaughtering individuals. That's all I'm saying. That just having a gun is not going to stop all these other individuals coming into a school, coming into a playground, and shooting our children. We've got to look at other ways of dealing with this particular problem.
In Texas, we already have several schools where the administrators, you mentioned earlier that no teachers and no administrators would want to carry. On the contrary, we have several teachers and administrators that already do carry in some school districts.
I think
the law in Texas allows the district to make its own decision.
You're always going to find one or two administrators here and there. But overall, when you ask the question, teachers, do you want to pack guns going into your classroom? The answer resoundingly is no. No teacher goes to
politicians don't have to get involved.
To be a teacher to say, I'm going to be carrying a gun.
If the teacher doesn't want to, nobody's forcing teachers to carry a gun. Why do you politicians have to get involved and say the teacher who wants to thinks it makes her safer, she may not?
No. If you happen to be a teacher and you go and purchase a gun and you want to go through the background checks and so on, ultimately you're going to have a gun.
And you can have it in school in California? It's okay with you?
No, absolutely not. You're not going to carry a gun in the school. We don't allow students to carry guns. Why are we going to let teachers carry
guns?
You're
making it a killing zone. Mr. Yee, you're making them killing zones.
Schools are a gun-free zone. We're not
yeah,
there
and
to
that's
teach
exactly
kids
where
how
bad
to
guys
shoot 'em
go,
up.
where they want to rack up a big
we're
body bag count, is the gun-free zone. That's where they rack up big body bag counts. That's where they go. Look at where
we're not going to solve this
where
in
guns
this
are
show.
not allowed.
Thank you both. I have to stop you. Suzanne Hupp, Leland Yee. Coming up, what happens when your town goes bankrupt? And what else can we learn comparing Texas and California? But people do leave Hotel California these days because they can't pay the bills. 4 California cities have now declared bankruptcy, Stockton the biggest, and San Bernardino. The result isn't pretty.
The community is slowly breaking down to nothing.
Businesses that are now empty, lots that are empty, parking lots that are empty.
Well, people are suffering. People are going through, you know, and there's no opportunities. There's nothing. It's like a ghost town here.
3/4 of the city's money went to what they call public safety. That means unionized cops and firemen. Politicians promised them much more money than the town had. So, do the people in San Bernardino realize that's the reason the town went belly up? No. This show's special correspondent Kennedy went there to ask and heard that even in bankruptcy, people like cops and firefighters.
We are not the ones that are creating the problem.
Firefighters are heroes, cops are heroes, so who's to say what's too much and what's not?
I don't blame anyone in particular. It's just a matter of things that happen over the course of years.
This next man is in the prison guards union. California prison guards make $66,000 a year before benefits.
The people of California, we've given so much, you know, and we're not getting anything back.
Because we give it all to the unions.
No, you don't.
Oh, yes, we absolutely do.
I pay the union dues. No, we don't.
No, you pay the union dues. We pay for your pensions.
Well, of course.
Of course. And the pensions make that $66,000 pay close to $100,000. They're big in California.
Oh, yeah, and the firefighters in San Bernardino, their salary has doubled. And now they make $150,000 a year.
But people weren't upset at them.
Well, I would say ignorance is... But no one there seemed very happy, so maybe that adage doesn't hold true for San Bernardino.
Well, Kennedy thought the mayor's office would be a place to go to learn more about what caused the bankruptcy, so she tried that.
That's San Bernardino City Hall. It's a really nice building. It looks really expensive, which might be part of the problem. Let's go get some answers. There must be people in there working 7 days a week to solve these problems. Mayor's office, 6.
I walked down an empty hallway looking for the mayor, looking for anyone. I felt like I was in a horror movie. It was creepy. Is anyone here? Hello? So I found an empty conference room and decided I would take over as mayor.
All right, everyone, thanks for coming. It's really great to have you here. I'm the acting mayor. Not a lot happening. Does anyone have anything that I should be looking at on the rundown? The agenda? Show of hands? All right, not all at once. It's a busy day, San Bernardino. We have a lot of problems. A lot of people out of work. A lot of businesses with shuttered doors. And I don't hear any answers from any of you.
All right, they were supposed to be in the office that day.
Yes, the mayor's office is supposed to be fully stocked on Fridays. There are other agencies that take Friday furloughs.
The city's less safe. The city attorney told residents, go home, lock your doors, and load your guns.
By the way, he was there, and he would not talk to us.
One union blamed the mayor and former city manager for spending money on a downtown movie theater.
Yeah, the movie theater is nice, but it's nothing compared to the $45.8 million deficit that the city of San Bernardino is running. And by the way, when they filed for bankruptcy, they had $150,000 in the city bank account.
The San Bernardino politicians said, we didn't see it coming. How could they? They owed $46 million. They had $100,000 in the bank.
Yes, and they have payments that they're required to pay into CalPERS, $1.8 million a month. And they didn't see that coming with $150K in the bank.
And San Bernardino tried to raise money through fees like expensive parking tickets, traffic tickets.
Look at all the money we just paid, more than $400 or $500 on just a speeding ticket, and they're going bankrupt.
What he didn't tell you is he was going 90 in a school zone.
So he should pay, but it's not going to cover all these pension obligations.
Nothing's going to cover these pension obligations. Not in San Bernardino, not in Stockton, not in Vallejo, not in Compton, not in any of these other cities in California that are simply failing.
Finding a silver lining, I hear that there's more civil society perking up. Volunteers are doing park maintenance, working at the animal shelter, replacing broken streetlights. Neighborhood watch associations are starting to blossom to police neighborhoods. That's good.
Yeah, and they want their city back. So they're taking it themselves. And it just goes to show the private solution is always better.
And it's what you're going to have to go to when the government has spent all the money. Thank you, Kennedy. Next, we take this same problem that bankrupted San Bernardino and see what it does to the whole state. It's not pretty. California is paradise for government workers. Per person, Texas actually has more of them. But California pays better and gives out such generous retirement benefits that California will probably go broke. Some 50-year-old retirees were promised they can collect forever. Well, until they die, but actually after that too, because their spouse may collect after they die, and the money just isn't there. Dan Mitchell studies state pension problems nationally for the Cato Institute. Kevin James is running to be mayor of Los Angeles. So before we get to what Kevin discovered in Los Angeles, how bad is this? These people want to be responsible, I would think.
I'm not sure they want to be responsible. I think the politicians want to get reelected, and the state government workers want to get as much as they can before the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. The problem is California is Greece, the Greece of America. There are too many people riding in the wagon, not enough people pulling the wagon. Now they've raised taxes, so you're going to see the productive people leaving the state and more people living off the government, voting for more government, but sooner or later, nobody's there to pay the bills.
All right, they pay the workers more in California, but California has a higher cost of living.
It does, but even with all that, that doesn't justify the difference between, say, $50,000 average wage salary versus $70,000 in California. California is pricing itself out of the market.
Plus the benefits which go into this fund called CalPERS, and they assume for years an 8% rate of return. Oh, we're going to make so much money. Now they've just lowered it from 7.75% to 7.5%, like that's responsible. Where do they get off thinking that they can make that rate of return? Why is that acceptable?
I'm going to assume tonight I'm going to party with the Victoria's Secret supermodels. I don't think it's going to happen, though. And likewise, I don't think that CalPERS is going to meet those targets that it's set. And if they don't meet those targets, it means their unfunded liability, which is huge already, will become enormous. And they simply won't be able to pay it in the same way that Greece hasn't been able to pay its bills.
All right, Kevin, let's talk about Los Angeles. You're running for mayor, so we won't go into your campaign specifically, but one thing you told me that astounded me is that the Los Angeles City Council members are paid $178,000 per year.
They are the highest paid legislative body in the nation, John. We just had a councilwoman that Janice Hahn went to Congress, the House of Representatives, and she has to take a cut in pay. They make more money than United States senators for a Los Angeles City Council.
Los Angeles, each councilman is given a car?
Well, each councilman, I'll tell you something else that really gets Angelenos. They get a car that has a license plate that says exempt, so they can park in meters and they don't get tickets. And in Los Angeles, our parking tickets are through the roof. And just as you were talking about in the last segment, with all of these fines and fees that they keep wanting to take from people that come to Los Angeles, it's not good for business. It chases customers away from our city and from our local businesses into neighboring communities where they don't get abused by City Hall.
$178,000 per year in Los Angeles versus in Dallas, $37,000, San Antonio, $1,400.
Well, those are part-time. Those are part-time city councils in Los Angeles.
But they seem to get it done.
They're a full-time council.
It's not like Los Angeles
of course they do.
is so well governed.
No,
Dan, put this in perspective nationally. Is it a mindset in California that says politicians just work magic and need to be compensated?
I think what happened is during the boom years in California, for decades after World War II, people were just pouring into the state. It was a lot of opportunity, great climate, and sure, government can charge a little bit more to get the great climate of California, but at some point, you hit the tipping level where all of a sudden it's just too expensive to create jobs, it's too expensive to finance a bloated workforce, it's too expensive to maintain all these pensions. But by the time you reach that level, if more than 50% of the voters in your state are somehow riding on the wagon, are either government welfare beneficiaries, government workers, or the retired living off government, how do you ever change? And that's what makes me so pessimistic. A beautiful state that I think is being ruined by big government.
Thank you, Dan Mitchell and Kevin James. So far tonight in the battle between Texas and California, Texas is winning, but when we return, a reason Texans should prefer California. Texas is less likely to go broke than California, and they have fewer stupid rules. Probably. They do have less total regulation, but Texas does have plenty of control-freak politicians, and as a result, your property may be safer in California than Texas. So says Scott Bullock from the Institute for Justice. So why is your property not as safe in Texas?
Well, Texas has some bad laws with regards to private property rights. Civil forfeiture laws are very aggressive and very potent in Texas, where the government can take your property even if you have not been convicted or even arrested for a crime, and then the burden is on the property owner to try to get their property back.
All right, explain civil forfeiture more. The Institute for Justice, your group, made this video about it. So if police arrest you, prosecutors must prove you're guilty before they can put you in jail.
But if police suspect your car was involved in a crime, they can take it, sell it, and in most places, pocket the proceeds to pad their budgets. With civil forfeiture, your property is guilty until you prove it innocent to get it back. And because most state and federal laws allow police and prosecutors to pocket the proceeds, they have a big incentive to pursue profits, not justice. How big? In 1986, the Justice Department's forfeiture fund took in $94 million. Now, it has more than $1 billion. Citizens are seeing cash, cars, and other property taken away for the flimsiest of reasons. Carrying too much cash? Police can accuse you of selling drugs or laundering money and seize it.
Come on, just because you have a lot of cash in the car, they can take your car?
Yes.
And the cash?
They can take the car and the cash and accuse you of either being a drug dealer or laundering money, even if there's no drugs in the car or they have no other reason to suspect you of wrongdoing. And then the burden
How much
shifts.
cash, typically?
It could be what the police officers considers to be an unusually large amount of cash, which could be as small as $900, $1,200, $2,000. And then the burden shifts to the property owner in Texas to try to get their property back. Also in Texas,
and hiring a lawyer to defend yourself would cost you much more than $1,200.
Absolutely. So most people just give up, and because it's a civil proceeding, the government can win by default, and that's the way many of these cases turn out.
You have one client whose truck was lost because he loaned it to somebody else who drove drunk.
That's right. And this happens all the time, where people who are wholly innocent of wrongdoing can still face the loss of their property. Also in Texas, police and prosecutors keep 90% of the proceeds from forfeiture, giving them a very direct and a very perverse incentive to go out and try to take as much property as possible.
In one state, the chief of police bought a margarita maker for his office with the funds. California isn't great on this either.
It's not great, but it is better than Texas. In California, police and prosecutors only keep 65%, giving them still certainly a bad and perverse incentive, but not as bad. And at least in California, the burden is on the government to try to prove that you did something wrong, unlike in Texas where the burden is on the property owner.
And the Institute says the best states for protecting property, Maine, North Dakota, Vermont. Let's move on to eminent domain, another property issue. Texas passed, after Kelo took this woman's house, Texas passed a constitutional amendment saying you can't do that. Texas should be good.
That's right. Texas does have much better eminent domain law than they originally did. The legislature passed some laws after the wake of Kelo, but they made a bunch of exemptions in the law, including an exemption for the Cowboys Stadium, where the government there took over 100 pieces of property to build the monolith to the Dallas Cowboys. Ironically enough now, California is better about eminent domain, not because of their laws, but because California is broke. And one of the things that the state did in order to try to improve their finances is to abolish redevelopment agencies throughout the state, and those were the main abusers of eminent domain. So this is an instance where the fiscal crisis in California has actually led to something that better protects property owners.
By defunding the government bullies, they steal fewer people's property.
That's exactly right, ironically enough.
Licensing rules. This is what it takes to start a business. In Texas, shampooers have to get a license?
Texas is one of 5 states that require shampooers to be licensed. They have to spend over $100 a year on a license. They have to pass 2 exams, something that you and I and probably most of the audience here successfully did this morning. You have to pass exams in Texas in order to become a licensed shampooer. That's ridiculous, and there's no justification for it.
To coach sports, you have to be a licensed teacher?
Texas is one of the few states that require that as well. You have to go to college for 4 years in order to coach any sport in Texas. Texans take their sports very seriously. This is just a barrier to entry into a legitimate occupation.
Commercial fishermen have to pay almost $5,000 in fees. But bad as Texas is, California in licensing is worse.
California is worse. California has very draconian occupational licensing laws, but Texas is 17th in the nation in their burdensome occupational licensing laws. So it's certainly better than California, but there's a lot of room for improvement in Texas when it comes to licensing.
Thank you, Scott Bullock. At least we found some things where California does okay. And coming up, one more thing we should be very grateful to California for. Thank you, California. America needs you. We need you the way we needed the Soviet Union, as a model of failure, to warn us what happens if we listen to those who say government does it better. The USSR died about 20 years ago. Many of you forgot its horrors. You young people may not even know them. That's why I'm grateful that we have not just California, but Illinois and Connecticut to remind us of what power-mad politicians do. Okay, that's not fair. American states aren't murderous dictatorships. And another difference, if you live in a big government state, you can move, vote with your feet. I did. I grew up in Illinois. It was a nice state, except in the winter. But gradually, its politicians gave away its future. They increased pay and pensions to government workers to the point that soon Illinois won't have money for much of anything else. I moved to New York City, which is no political paradise either. But what could I do? This is where the big TV news jobs were and still are. And at least New York's promises to unions may not bankrupt us too soon. And I could move again. I'd still be stuck with federal law, but it's an advantage to live in a country that has 50 states. Each can be a laboratory of democracy. If one gets it right, I can move there. A group called the Free State Project invites you to move to New Hampshire to help create liberty in our lifetime. It's too early to see how that one works out. But I'm glad that we have states, so I don't have to leave my country to escape its worst laws. In Europe, I would. French actor Gerard Depardieu just moved to Belgium to escape France's proposed 75% tax on rich people. Years ago, high taxes in Britain drove David Bowie to move to Switzerland and Rod Stewart to Los Angeles. Wait, that's in California. I wonder if he's now going to move back. Oh, he has. In 2010, he moved his family back to England, though he doesn't claim taxes were the reason. Americans who want to escape high taxes can move to one of these states: Alaska, Florida, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming. All have no state income tax. And surprise, those states create more jobs. It's no surprise, actually. Without an income tax, they were forced to limit the growth of their governments, so they did. Every state has schools, social service programs, prisons. Those states find a way to fund those for less. Then they reap benefits. Last decade, those 9 states gained population from other states. They increased jobs by 4.9%. Jobs in the rest of the states declined by 2.6%. Competition between neighboring states also deters state politicians from indulging in all their whims. New Hampshire's lack of an income tax has kept Vermont's politicians from going completely crazy. The existence of Arizona and Nevada nearby deter California's legislators from going crazy. Well, actually, they still go crazy, despite so many people moving from California to Nevada and Arizona. But it's good that we have places like Texas. Smaller government there means growth and a gradual increase in prosperity, while California shrinks. I hope the rest of the country watches and learns from that. That's our show. See you next week.